I just want to talk a little bit, you know, as she said, just a little bit about what it's like to start a business, why I started my business, and why it's very likely to be a good choice for you, and why you don't need to be scared. You don't need to be scared coming out in Brooklyn, where it's competitive and expensive. You don't need to be scared coming out of St. Francis, where it's smaller, but it's powerful. And you should really be able to go out with confidence, not only in the skills that you've developed while you were here, but also in yourselves and in your sense of mission and purpose and what you can and should be doing in the world. A lot of times you're probably working now. How many people have part-time gigs now? Yeah, so you know when you're inside of a job maybe where there are holes, where certain systems could be more efficient, where if you're working with products, something could be maybe a little cooler, a little more interesting, or presented in a way that might make people want to buy it and make your life and your boss's life easier and better. So you're already building that foundation and you're already getting ready to do those things. And we just need to kind of take that next step. So for me, just a little bit about story. Yes, I was a St. Francis student. I was an English major. And at the time, like many of you, I was also working. And one of the jobs that I had was doing editorial work and meeting facilitation for a fairly young woman who was a business owner. So from her, I got that sense of, I could probably do this too. I could build a successful business. She had a successful business that traveled around the world working with development aid organizations. So she was doing good work, she was working hard, and she was running this out of her home. She was doing that in Washington, D.C. I was here in New York. So also I started to get that sense of, you can work with people whether you're side by side or not. And that turned out to be a really important and really valuable skill when I launched my business in 2007, and everybody started working from all over the country, collaborating with people in California, collaborating with people in Switzerland. These are all things I ended up doing. And I built those skills just with that little part-time gig to help pay for school and to help pay for, you know, what you need to buy as a college student. So that's sort of what put the seed there. And some of the work was similar as well. I was doing a lot of communication, a lot of writing. I was learning what it meant to talk to people from different parts of the world and to meet them where they are. To really come and say, well, this is what I know my boss wants me to say. Are you hearing what she wants you to hear? So I had to take it that next step and really put myself in my audience's shoes. That also ended up being critically important in my job now, because that's what I do. I work for businesses and make sure that their audiences hear, know, and understand them enough to trust them, buy from them, work with them. So that foundation started, you know, to form. After that, I graduated, and when I graduated college, you had to do things like get a job right away to get health insurance. You guys have a little more flexibility with that, so take advantage of it. So I worked as a teacher, sort of that really traditional jump from the English major to the English teacher. I taught high school up in the Bronx, and I continued to still do this side work. I did some editing for people, I did some writing for people. I kept that independent entrepreneurial side alive, and I was able to bring in a little extra money when I needed it. After that, I came here to St. Francis, and I worked in the admissions office. And that's where, again, I was sort of aware of how important it is to meet people where they are. And I got a taste of what it's like to represent an organization that I believe in, that I trust, and that I want other people to believe in and trust. So I would go around to all the high schools. I'm sure you remember seeing your admissions people coming in, talking about the school, meeting people, making relationships, not just with students, but certainly with guidance counselors and other people at high schools, starting to build connections, build a network, and starting to understand a little bit more what it's like to be the voice of an organization. Again, a key piece of what I now do. After that, I moved on to Catholic Charities, and I worked in their communications department. And that's where I said, this is everything I've kind of been doing, and I want to do this. I want to help an organization share its voice. I want to help an organization that's mission-driven to get their mission to motivate. And that's when I said, this is it. This is what I'm doing. But after a while, you share the same mission with the same people every day, and you start to get a little itchy, especially if you have that entrepreneurial spirit. You want to go out, you want to build something, you want to do more, you want to talk to more people and make more relationships. So I said, this is what I want to be doing, but I don't want to be working on or sharing one person's mission every day, all the time. I want to do this for more people. And that was the point at which I started to form my business. So what I did was I went back to the woman I had worked for way back in the day, and I said, do you have any work for me? What do you have? So I started doing some more side projects for her. And then I started reaching out to other contacts that I had met through my other jobs, and I started saying, you know, I'm thinking of starting this business. This is what I'm going to do. Do you have anything for me? So I did little things. I did brochures. I helped people with press releases. I helped friends and neighbors draft business plans and work on website design. Really fundamental communications pieces, largely for smaller groups. But I had enough income at that point to say, it's now or never. And when I went out, I left my job, I built the relationships, I kept them going, and then that was it. I launched a business in 2007. Was I making as much as I was making before that, even at a nonprofit? No, not right away, but shortly after, because I was determined, because I stayed focused, and mostly because, and this is the most important thing for you guys to know, because I was flexible. The biggest opportunity and the biggest challenge for you as an entrepreneur is flexibility. You need to be flexible to opportunities, to relationships and partnerships. You also need to be flexible to changes in technology and in standards. When I launched, Twitter was something people kind of laughed about. They were like, oh, I can't tell you how many clients I spoke with who said, what am I going to do, talk about what I ate and like whether I went to the bathroom today? That was how people received Twitter. That was how people responded when you said, hey, I'm a social media consultant. And they went, I'm not paying for that. Nobody's going to use that. Well, look at that, right? So stay determined, stay flexible, learn, and evolve. It's very important to have a business plan. I know that you guys are talking about working on that. At the same time, it's really important to have the confidence to break your own plan. If something else comes that's better, that's smarter, that's more efficient, don't say, I can't do that because it's not in my plan. Look at it and say, how does that get me to my goal? Because my plan is about getting me to my goal. A stable business, a functioning business, a growing business, all these things, right? So what can you do, even if it's going to break the specifics of your plan, that's going to help you reach that goal? Be open to it. Sometimes it's working with new people. Sometimes it's working in new places. Other times it's embracing these things like new technologies that might not have been there when you drafted that plan. Another key piece for me and for all of you guys is to listen to the experts. You're coming out, if you want to start this business now, when you're young, go for it. Okay, don't listen to people who say you need way more experience before you can even think about it. Well, you need some capital, and you need to be safe, and you need to do what you have to do to make enough money. But you do not need to put in 10 years in your career because somebody said, put in 10 years in your career, and then you can go. When you're younger, you can be more flexible. You have a little less to lose more often than not. You can take some risks, and you can be smart. You can also be innovative. So make sure that you listen to the experts on the really important things. Listen to your lawyers, listen to your insurance guy. Listen to your partners with whom you've worked, bosses you've had, mentors. Pull from their experience. Do not assume that because you are creative and energetic and innovative, they can't offer you value. Because they can. They did for me, they can for you. Absolutely. But at the same time, just as much as you listen, do not be afraid to lead. If you are confident and you are smart and you've done your research and you are better at what you do, confidently better at what you do than anybody else does, go out and do it. Challenge people to follow, challenge people to join you, but do not explain why you are young and you're doing it anyway. Do not be scared of yourself or your success or somebody who's not confident in you. Do not be afraid to lead. I'm a risk-averse person as a rule, and people laugh at me when I say that because I launched a business before I was 30, you know, with nothing much to fall back on except what I had kind of saved on my own. But I think that for me, the work itself was more important than the fear that I had to overcome to do it. And I think that for me it was the right time. If I had really focused on that fear and not sort of pushed toward that desire to lead and to do new things, I would still be waiting to do it. Because every year you're making a little more money at your job, and every year you have to spend a little more money to live, especially here. So there's always a reason to say no. But if you have enough pieces in place that you can confidently proceed, go for it. And don't let the fear stop you. Always be ready to pick up a side job. Always be ready to do a project that maybe wasn't on your radar, but you can take a chance on it and it's going to bring in, you know, the money that you need. At the same time, and this is really important, especially in my job, because I work with a lot of creatives, I do a lot of intangible kind of work, right? If you're writing an article for someone, that's a little bit different than, you know, building a house. You know, you can't see it, you can't touch it. It's different than making a t-shirt. Right, so it's very easy to say, well, I didn't have to pay 7 people for the production of this item, so let me just shave more and more and more and more off my cost because I'm scared, because I want to make that same amount I was making for my salary. But you run into some trouble there when you start to devalue your brand. So make sure that you value what you do, you set a value for it, an actual dollar value. And you say, this is what this is worth. This is what this costs. And if somebody has to say no to me because it's a little bit more, I need to be okay with that. I'd rather do a little side job that's not related. You know, better you should work at Starbucks for, you know, a couple shifts a week than you should devalue what you do, because you will not succeed if you keep shaving off what your product actually costs. I find it challenging because, especially since I have very different industries that I work with. I work with a lot of people in technology, and at the same time I work with a lot of businesses in the arts. So very different work, very different mindsets of people, and I have to shift gears really quickly. So I have to stay focused, and it's hard and it's a challenge, but that's one of the biggest reasons why I decided to do it, because it became a little bit too easy to kind of stay in one world and in one set of language. And I could see over the years, you can get lazy doing that. You can stop seeing other people's perspectives. So for me, if I'm working with, you know, a software programmer and I'm doing a press release for him or an article for him, and I just worked with a dance company, well, some of their mission and some of their excitement and some of their creativity can bleed into how I explain what he does and ultimately make it more engaging. So I think having to speak across disciplines keeps me creative and it keeps me focused. Well, internships can be tough. They can be time-consuming, and sometimes you want money. And that's not a bad thing. That's not a dirty word. A couple different things you can do. The first, obviously, is make relationships, right? You're going to want to make relationships with people like me. You're going to want to talk to your friends, see what their friends are doing. Especially with something like digital media, a lot of people are very creative, and they are their own shop. So they're always looking for people to bring in for projects. And you can come in, that's a case where you can come in at a lower hourly rate maybe than someone else because you don't have the experience. It's going to take you longer, and that's okay. But that can work to your advantage. In addition to those real, you know, offline kind of relationships that you can build, you can also do things if you're in digital media, if you're a designer. Craigslist is actually great for stuff like that. I have a friend who had actually worked for me before we became friends, and she put up an ad on Craigslist that said, I'm a graphic designer, I went to art school, this is my background. Click through, see some of her samples, and she ended up doing amazing work for me. Graphic design, web design, and she became a real asset that I could bring to my clients. So, you know, that's a good start. Also check out Media Bistro, and that's for anybody who's kind of in the media world, content development, content creation. Media Bistro is an organization that gives you some experience, some classes, and it also has a marketplace for freelancers. What I started to do is I started to talk to people in a way that made them understand what something like Twitter was. So you sit down and you say to someone, well, you know, I get what you're saying and I get that you've seen that, but what would you do if I told you that I could get you in front of 1,000 people at once? And I could have you a direct line to that person to say, this is what I do, this is why it matters. I also talked to them about ROI, right, return on investment, and how Twitter can help bolster that. So these are people who a lot of times I had built a website for, or I had done web content for. And I said, well, look, you just spent a lot of money on your website. How are you going to get people to go to it? You know, you're not going to put up flyers on the street, but here's how Twitter can bring people in to your website. And so once they started looking at it in the context of ROI, in the context of their business, in the context of a free way of broadcasting their message, then they started to come around to it. And the next step after that was that I looked at how it helped them build relationships and set themselves up as an expert. And that's my number one piece of advice for my clients, is to establish themselves as experts in their field. It's my number one piece of advice for you guys too. You know, understand why you do what you do better than anybody else, and then find as many platforms as you can to articulate that and to build relationships around that fact. And for them, you know, they soon learned that Twitter did that. But she asked a great question. She said, how long did it take before I felt like my business was rewarding on all fronts, right? Like bringing in the money I needed, doing what I wanted to do, kind of working as hard for me as I was working for it. I'm afraid to say that that ever has happened, because I think if it ever does, then I'll kind of slide back and get complacent. And I think that's sort of maybe it's an entrepreneur thing or a small business owner thing, that you've kind of, like I said, you've got this itch, right? And you want to make sure that you keep it alive and going. That said, I started to feel more confident as a business owner, sort of going to, you know, you go to a lot of events at the beginning and you're a little bit shy at first to write on your little name card, owner. You're a little bit shy to introduce yourself, owner. Again, I started when I was not a lot older than you guys, and most of the people at these events were significantly older than that. So when did I feel confident, you know, kind of sticking my hand out and saying, owner, you know, yes, it is mine? Probably about 2.5, 3 years in. After I had enough client successes that I could point to where it was clear that I was an expert in my field, after I knew that if I picked up the phone or somebody else picked up the phone and called somebody, every person they talked to would say, yeah, she's good, she knows her stuff. And I think a lot of it came from that sort of outside communication or validation in a way, particularly referrals. When you're going into somebody not cold, not ready to pitch, but because your client said, hey, call her, she's the one, then you start to get that feeling of, all right, this is good, this feels right. By and large, that's not really, we don't go after the same market. I'm really passionate about working with small business owners. So I work with a lot of people when they get started and then grow with them, or with companies that have like up to 35 employees who have been around for maybe 10, 20 years. I had one company out here in Brooklyn that's been around for over 90 years, but they were also kind of like a small, local, really successful, but local guys. So I don't typically go head-to-head with people like that. In cases where I do or would, I would really just focus on the value of what we do, our perspective, our experience, our uniqueness and innovation, which is something that applies to everything you guys are kind of feeling and presenting, coming out. And I would also make sure that I assembled a team that was ready to play at that level, because it can't just be me. And it's a really great thing in my business, again, because there are people like you who are saying, hey, what can I do? Can I come work for you? You can assemble teams very easily. And when you build strong relationships, even more so. So I would assemble a really powerful team. I start with relationships that I already have, and that's really how my business has grown. I will work on project teams for a client where I and other business owners share that client. And then from there, you start to say, hey, we work really well together. And oftentimes those are, you know, slightly larger businesses with more resources, and then I will pair up with them or bring them in for projects. So I would start with people I've worked with already. In the case of media and publishing, I work with publicists as well, so we'll like tag team for a client, and I'll do communication strategies and implementation, and she'll do, you know, the more of the publicity. So I would go to her, because I know she has a lot of media and publishing contacts. I would bring her in and her favorite people. That's a great question. First of all, I would ask them, why is that person offering 600? And we would look at who they are, what they do, what kind of value they're bringing. And then I would talk to them about where my price came from. I'm always very detailed in articulating prices to prospects. In fact, I've gotten a lot of compliments on that, which I always think is kind of weird. They're like, oh, your proposal was very clear. And I'm thinking, who would spend money if they didn't know where it was going, right? Like, tell them. So that 1,000 in that case isn't just an arbitrary number, but, you know, 500 of it goes to this, this, 200 of it goes to this, things like that. I would walk them through it. I would explain why it is what it is. I would show them the value that they were getting. And if ultimately they said, listen, I'm buying on price, this is all I could do, I'd say, okay, go with them and call me in 6 months and let me know. And I've had that happen. I've had people say, listen, I can't swing it. Now, first of all, in some cases, you bend a little. You might not go from 1,000 to 6, but maybe you meet in the middle, especially for me if it's a nonprofit, if it's a referral from another client, if we build in, first we'll do this and then we'll grow together. That's totally fine. But I wouldn't just sort of knock it and say, oh, he said 600, 550, let's do this. Because you're setting yourself up for failure. You're setting yourself up to start to resent the client. You're setting yourself up to spend more than you're making and ultimately to erode your brand. But I have had that experience of people saying, I have to buy on price, you seem great, I can't do it. And they have come back and they have said, oh, now I get it. Maybe could we do something? And we do. Because sometimes people just have to see it. And I respect people's budgets. I don't judge people on how much they are willing to spend. If they can spend it, then they need to understand what they're buying. And I am responsible for showing that that trust that they put in me to give me all that money was worth it. And I take that responsibility very, very seriously. On average, I would say it's about 10 sort of standing anchor clients. And then I'm able to do smaller projects for different clients at different times. What I do is I work with subcontractors. So they are not employees, they're not on my staff. That means that I am not responsible for benefits and all of those other sort of expenses associated with that. I'm also not obligated to keep them on if I need them for one project but not for another. And they're not obligated to stick with me. They can go make money somewhere else. So that's how I do it. And I started doing that about 2 years in. Around that same time, the confidence started picking up. I would say in the past 2 years, they have been coming to me more than I have been going to them. And it's almost exclusively on referrals from other clients. And that makes you feel good. It's a really good experience. And also, more often than not, in fact, I think 100% of the time, if I've done one thing for a client, they then ask me to do something else. So one example of that kind of speaks to both of those points. I recently had a client recommend me to a friend for social media training. So one day thing, not a big deal. I went in, I trained him, I trained his team, and off that conversation he said, can you do this project for me? And so then it started to evolve. And that's a great thing to keep in mind, especially if you're in a service business. Find ways to kind of turn your service into a simple product so people get to know you, they see your expertise, they come to trust you, and then they say, okay, then I can, hire you on to do something bigger. Again, that sort of speaks to that, if you're asking more and somebody else is asking less. So you can say, listen, I can't do your social media management for the price you're giving me, but I can come in and do a training for this price. They'll have you come in, more often than not, they'll say, that was a bigger deal than I thought. Can we work something out? Maybe you can help us. So that's a good tip. Be flexible with what you offer, and then you're able to grow a little bit better, and you grow their trust in you. It's all about you trusting them and them trusting you. Client calls, a lot of writing, strategy. Primarily my workday consists of working for the clients as opposed to kind of pitching my business and marketing my own business. The bulk of my day is dedicated to serving my clients. Social media management. Spend a lot of time talking to people and a lot of time writing about what they do. Actually, I work primarily from home, and there are a lot of distractions at home. I had a friend who said, well, you could always just mop the floor. I said, well, yeah, but I don't. And if for some reason I did, I'd be outlining a blog post for somebody, or I'd be working on, a content calendar for somebody else. You do have to stay disciplined. And the how for me is that I get back to that relationship and that trust that someone put in me. You don't want to get in the mindset of I work for my clients, because your clients are your clients and you are giving them a value that they deserve to have and you deserve to be compensated for. So it's not that feeling of I'm on the clock, but it is that feeling of somebody placed his or her trust in me to do what's right for their business. I know how much my business matters to me and how much their business matters to them. I'm not going to, you know, go turn on General Hospital. I'm going to make sure that I stay focused, because that's, I mean, like, all kidding aside, that's a misconception. You know, you hear that a lot with people who work from home. Oh, you don't really work, or oh, it's totally fine, you can go do that. Well, no, you know, yes, you're absolutely flexible, and that's great. It's great for parents, but at the same time, my commitments and my promises to people keep me focused and disciplined. Yeah, that has been a big challenge, especially at the beginning. You sometimes don't let yourself stop. And I'm sure that's even happened with you guys. You know, you'll be up like drafting ideas for your business and things like that, and you'll just keep going and going and think, well, if I stop, the idea is going to fall out of my head, or if I don't stay so committed to this, it's all going to fall apart. You do have to learn how to sort of make your own stopping point when you're the one in charge, especially if, you know, it's not lights out, get on the train, get home. But at the same time, you know, I can work at night. So I have a 5-year-old child. If I want to pick her up from school and take her to dance lessons, I can do that. And then I can come home at 9 o'clock and power up again and make sure everything I promised people I would do is done in time. But I'm still able to, you know, have a life a little bit. But it's hard. That's a real challenge. Sometimes I'll see things and I won't pitch for them for that reason, but no one's ever come to me and asked me to do something that conflicted with my values or my sense of social responsibility. I've been really lucky to have the opposite, to work with nonprofits and for-profit companies that work in sustainability and things like that, things that really match my values, but that's a tough one. That's a tough one. Is I do nonprofit discounts. So my rate for a nonprofit is different than my rate for a for-profit corporation. Also, I work very flexibly with clients. Again, you know, when we do the budget, it's a living, I call the budget a living document. You know, until it turns into the contract, let's work together and make sure that it works. But in terms of like discounts or slash and burn kind of things, no, because I'm less product-based than that. I have people literally all over the world. I have a client in Montenegro, which is hard to like organize Skype calls, you know, 7 o'clock in the morning. But yeah, no, not at all. And I do a lot of work with partners and clients out in California, Washington, D.C., here in New York, of course. But yeah, again, because of that connectivity and because of the digital landscape, not only in what I do, but how I do it, I'm not limited by geography at all. Sometimes I do travel, absolutely. Sometimes I do travel. And what's also great is if you work with maybe, you know, a variety of clients within one industry, as I do, you can do things like travel to conventions and then set up your meetings with all your guys no matter where they are. So I try to do that as well. I think not at the very beginning, because I was really excited about it and maybe a little naive. But I'd say maybe about 1.5 years in. Now, I started in 2007. And then 2008 happened and the market just went bananas. So I was scared, and then I started to look at it and I said, I'm actually a little safer than these big corporations that have all these employees, that have all this overhead. What I did was I kept overhead as low as humanly possible, and then maybe a little lower. And I survived. I worked really hard. I presented myself as a cost-effective solution to an in-house team. And that worked really well, particularly at that time. But yeah, you keep the faith. And for me, every time I get scared, I work a little harder. And thankfully, it's working for us. Actually, I recently read something that said one of the key elements to business success, particularly for small and kind of micro businesses, is superior managerial skills and faith that it's going to be okay. And for me, you know, those managerial skills were not learned in the classroom. I didn't take business classes. I have a graduate degree in communications so that I could get better and better at what I do rather than managing how I do it. I was always around businesses and business owners growing up. I'm sure that had a lot to do with it. My father was a business owner. I worked closely with small business owners. And beyond that, I did a lot of reading. And I leaned on the experts, as I said. You know, business information centers are great, business resource centers, do research online, and talk to business owners. If you know a guy who owns a pizza shop, but you're building an app, talk to the guy who owns the pizza shop about what it's like to build a business, about how to incorporate, about what the risks are, what the fears are. Get those resources from the people who are on the ground, because that's really where the real information lives. Education for business is fantastic. It's interesting. One of the risks of it is that you learn a model, and if the model breaks like it did in 2008, you're lost. But if you learn from people who are doing it, you hear how many times they kind of changed their track and shifted and stayed flexible, then you're likely to follow a similar path. Be confident, but be confident in part because you're smart, you're researched, and you know when to trust people who have done it longer and probably better than you have, especially when you're starting. So how do you do professional development when your boss isn't pointing you to where it is and isn't paying for it? Because that's a real value of being in a company, especially a big one. You get expensive training for free. One of those places is Media Bistro, as I had mentioned. I did some training there. Graduate school was great for me for some of that training, particularly for how to do what I do. And beyond that, you know, once you have your business and you're out in the world and you're making relationships, you're also getting pitched a lot of stuff. So you start to get those same links and those same advertisements for professional development seminars and things like that. You know, I'm always careful to keep in budget, but if it's worth it, I absolutely do spend the money my boss would spend on me, on myself, and on my business. An external team will come in and help keep your business as strong as it needs to be successful, to support you and to continue to grow. That external team can include a number of people. It can include lawyers and other business consultants, people who help you to understand what type of business should I have and what does that mean. How much does an LLC offer me in terms of protection versus a sole proprietorship? At the same time, especially in New York, how expensive is it to register as an LLC versus as a sole proprietorship? So again, the lawyers, the business consultants, they can help you with that. Accountants can be a very important piece of your external team, making sure that you're doing what you need to do for taxes. They'll advise you on whether you need to pay quarterly or at the end of the year, things like that. Things that you are well served to seek from experts. Again, while you are the best in your field and while you're getting better and better at managing your own business, a huge part of that management is relying on an external team. Insurance brokers, you want to make sure that your business is protected, and especially if you're a small business on your own, you want to make sure that your personal assets are protected. Where are my vulnerabilities? How can I plug those sort of vulnerability gaps and make sure that I'm safe and my family is safe in addition to my business being safe? Yeah, you have business resource centers right in downtown Manhattan. You have places like the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce. Lots and lots of organizations that will help you. And this might be sort of unconventional advice, but in addition to those organizations that we're more familiar with and those resources that we're more familiar with, also use social media to get information about how to make sure your business is as strong as it can be. There are lots and lots of local organizations and local groups that will invite speakers to come in and give you the kind of advice you need for legal, for insurance, for your health insurance as well. Work with them, become part of these groups, build relationships, and meet the experts who are there. And more often than not, they're doing this for free. They're doing this because they have their own sense of a social justice mission, because they want to give back to their community, and because they want to form relationships with you guys, because you guys are the future. You're going to be bigger than you are when you start, and it is to their benefit to work with you and to work with you well. So also keep that in mind when you're accepting something for nothing in terms of legal advice or insurance advice or whatever it might be. You're still bringing value by being there, and you're still part of a relationship, even though you're taking advantage of a pro bono opportunity. And take advantage of as many of them as you can. In a number of ways. She asked, how do I give back to the community? Obviously, we can all always do more. But I first off work with a lot of sustainability. And again, I do the nonprofit discounts, and I make sure that I'm basically just charging them what it costs for me to be there. I work with some other charitable organizations. I am fortunate enough to have good friends who have started nonprofits. One has an international nonprofit that works with orphanages. I did a lot of pro bono work for her, helped establish their communications plan, helped set up their team, which really helped them to launch as a nonprofit, which, as you know, takes you to the next level in terms of being able to get donations and things like that. I stay active now as a contributor and an advocate for them. We participate in the March of Dimes run, things like that. And it's not about, you know, getting someone to say this business was here. It's about saying, I'm fortunate and I'd like to do what I can to help others and to be part of my community. And you develop really strong relationships with your clients. I had a friend, sort of one of my inspirations as a kid. He ran a very successful business. And I remember him saying that when you first start out, your friends are your clients. Because that's kind of a prevailing wisdom, right? You pitch to your friends first, and that's how you build up a client base. He goes, and then after a couple of years, your clients become your friends. And it's absolutely true. You develop real friendships, bless you, you develop real friendships with these people. You trust them, you work together, you're in the trenches, and it's great. It's great because, yes, we're working, but we're also, you know, coming together as friends. I did, yeah, it was out of pocket. But my overhead was very low because I was working out of home. I had to purchase a computer, you know, so about $1,000 there. I did some printing to send out flyers and things like that. I registered my domain, which is something you want to make sure that you do. So these are fairly nominal expenses, but they do add up. And yeah, I did have to tap into the reserves a little bit at the start, but I worked hard and it was quickly replenished. Was it a lot of money? No. No, it really wasn't. But I'm fortunate because it's a service business. So I didn't have to put out money for a patent. I didn't have to put out money for, you know, product development or manufacturing or things like that. So if you're launching that kind of a business, do set up a much larger reserve and you'll be safer. The long business name and the official name of the business is Contemporary Communications Consulting. The reason I did that is because when I started, I did a lot of work in Washington. Washington likes consultants. Washington likes a very clear definition of who you are and what you do, especially if you're putting in an RFP or something like that. If you're responding to an RFP, that's where the request for proposal. So the government will say, you know, I need a contractor who can build a website for me. And you need to have a name that makes sense to them and their community. And I launched at a time when things like MailChimp launched and SurveyMonkey launched, like all these sort of fun, hip names that now seem a little silly. But for me, because of who I was pitching to at the start, it had to be like very clear. For branding, I now use Eames, E-Eames, which is the first letter of my first name and then my last name. It's a little cleaner, it's obviously shorter in the URL, and much of what is searchable on me is my name, so it works well. 5 years from now, I think I'll probably have one person on as an employee. I think that would help to go for some bigger projects. It would also help to alleviate some of the stress from me. Yeah, I think that would be the biggest change I see in 5 years, but ultimately continuing to have really strong relationships, really personal and direct relationships with clients and doing good work for them. I think that that's kind of what keeps us all up at night, right? Even if we have the 9-to-5 job that feels super safe, because that can be pulled out from you at any time. So obviously, you know, my concern is continuing to do the work that I need to do to bring in the revenue that I need to bring in to remain successful. And it's interesting because it does keep me up at night, absolutely. But what I always come back to, what sort of puts me back to sleep, is that idea that, yeah, if I had a 9-to-5 gig and somebody pulled it from me and didn't give me a severance, I'd have nothing. At the end of that week, I would have nothing new coming in. I have this business that's organic and flexible. So if something happened where I lost a client or I had more expenses than I needed for whatever reason and I had to bring in money, I can always adapt. I can always introduce something new, bring in someone new, and grow. It's hard to grow when you're given an assigned role at the discretion of an employer. It's intimidating when it's all you and it could be whatever, you know, it can be huge or it can be a failure. That's intimidating, but it's also very freeing because you can continue to make that business work for you. Even as a kid, I kind of always assumed that this is how it would be. And in a lot of ways, I didn't know what steps I would need to take. That's what came with experience and with time and with technology. But yeah, I think I kind of always knew. I have a few different models, and yes, my income comes directly from my clients to the business. And we have a bunch of different models. We have monthly retainers, we have project fees, we have hourly fees, depending on the type of work and the type of client that it is. How do they pay me? Checks, direct deposits. I typically don't process credit cards because, again, that's a fee that you kind of don't need to deal with. I have some clients who use apps for it, like Chase Quick Pay and things like that. A lot of the nonprofits are fans of that. Yeah. When I first started, I said I need to pay myself X amount. And so I did that, and I kept the rest in to grow the business. And now it's a little bit less deliberate than that. Now I really focus on building the business, putting as much into the business as possible, and I have enough of my own savings on the personal side because I started out by saying I will pay myself a salary. I think I might be a little more fluid with it than some other people, partly because I'm really focused on saving and protection and things like that. But that's a very good question, and it's something that you should always kind of track back and see, where am I? Can I make changes to that as your business grows? There are certain things that are set. There are certain rates that just are what they are. But if we look at sort of larger scale projects and long-term relationships, I take into account the age of the business, the industry that the business is in, the amount of work that I have to do, and if there's any sort of learning curve or need to bring in more people and things like that. So yeah, it's absolutely customized for everyone except for the few things like media trainings, the things that are more like products, certain types of web design work. Those are flat, but the rest are customized to the client. I write better than anyone I have ever met. Partly because I work really hard at it, partly because it's a gift and I'm grateful for it. I do believe that there is no one who can listen to a client and fully understand that client, his or her perspective and his or her audience, and produce something that is so uniquely that client's, and at the same time achieving the communications goals that I know and understand. No one can do that as well as I can. Are there elements of my business that other people can do better? Yes, and that's why I hire subcontractors. I'm not a designer, but I'm lucky enough to work with some really, really good ones who are the absolute best. One of my first bosses, I must have been 15 when I worked for him. He was an insurance agent, and he built his business from the ground up. Long Island guy in DC. This guy was great. You talk about like, when did you know you were going to be an entrepreneur? When he first got married and he first started to launch his career, he decided he was going to import lava rocks from Italy. Well, needless to say, it didn't work out very well, and he had like a lot of rocks in his garage. But then he, picked himself up and said, what else can I do? But that same entrepreneurial spirit, that same energy and commitment that went into the rocks, he put into a more conventional industry. He did extremely, extremely well, and he hired me to do like filing, simple stuff as a young teenager. And I watched him work, and I listened to him talk to his clients, and I looked and saw how much they trusted him. And when in the insurance industry, you talk about topics that are really hard. You talk about life and death. You're asking people to spend a lot of money on something they don't know if it's going to happen, or on something inevitable like death that they don't want to happen, and they don't want to talk about it, and they don't want to invest in it. And he made them so comfortable and so confident in him and the relationship they had with him that then he was able to explain what he did. Kind of like the silly Twitter thing, right? Like, they had no idea what this was. They didn't want to talk about it. But maybe using this guy Joe as a model, unknowingly, I said, well, let me meet you where you are. Let's have a relationship where you can trust that what I'm saying is not, just towing somebody's line and trying to pitch you for money. So yeah, he was my example, and he was extremely successful, and I would be lucky to have the kind of career and the kind of respect from colleagues and clients that he does. Something that I think a lot of people are surprised to hear, I know my daughter was, she said, well, you love working, right? Because you do it all the time. And I said, no, I don't always love working. You can be passionate about what you do. You can love your industry. You can love your clients. But at the end of the day, vacations are fun, and you don't always like to be working, right? Even if it is, you know, a mission, you don't always love working. It can get dry, it can get old, you can get tired. But that sense of recreation, that sense of flexibility and sort of infusing new life into what you do keeps you going, keeps it from getting stale. At the beginning, I was a little bit too fearful to take breaks. And I think I learned that you're better when you can be fresh. Clients appreciate boundaries, and you as the provider need to set some of those boundaries. Sometimes if you're too available, then again, that's a way of devaluing what you do. So what I do is I would never take a vacation, for instance, in June, at all in the month of June, because I work with clients in industry who have their big trade show in the middle to the end of June, and it is crush time for communications and marketing. And sometimes I'm traveling down there and all of that. So I would never do that. But otherwise, I look at my schedule, I look at theirs, I give them some advanced, you know, warning. This is when I won't be here. And you double up a little bit before you leave. As long as you have that constant flow of communication with clients, you've set boundaries, they know that you're a professional just like they are, then it's a little bit easier to do that. But yeah, that's a good question. And don't be afraid to take time to renew, take time to be creative and time to think. It's where that recreation and that flexibility is sometimes born. Like, think about how many people you see on a train, and sometimes you're a little bogged down by it, but other times, you know, you're kind of pleasantly surprised, you know, or you run into somebody you went to high school with on the, like, it's nice. So yeah, you can be a little bit cut off. I think because of the nature of my work, there's a lot of conversation. It is very relationship driven, so while I'm not always in front of someone, I'm always talking to someone else throughout the day. I meet with clients in person a lot. You know, my local clients, we do a lot of things together. This Sunday, there's a pop-up book fair in Carroll Gardens that I'm a part of for a client. So, you know, you do need to make sure that you stay in the world, because not only does your sort of person feel better when you do that, but your work is better when you're not stuck in your vacuum. Same concept of, I didn't want to continue kind of recycling the same mission for the same business forever. I needed to hear other voices. You need to hear other voices when you're being creative, so you need to get out there. On the business side, you know, you need to go to events and things like that. And in terms of your daily business, sometimes you work at Starbucks. You know, you got to get out there. It also gives you a chance to talk to people about what you do and to meet people who may become clients or partners. I think my challenge a little bit was different than that. It was, and this was on me, this was a lesson that I needed to learn. I needed to make it a little bit easier for them to say yes, because I got a lot of, yeah, I want to work with you. What can you do? You know, so I think if I had come in, you know, make that conversation a little bit shorter and that move from sort of pitch to client a little shorter. Be ready with a very clear explanation of what I did and a specific way of helping them, as opposed to, hey, you know, I know you work for this business or started this business and I do communications, maybe you guys should use me. Oh, we'd love to use you, and then it kind of stops. I needed to offer them something to say yes to. So when I started doing that, it was better. Luckily, they always had faith in me, so I didn't have too much of an issue there, but I know many people in other industries for whom it was hard. Sometimes things like the insurance industry. I have a friend who was a life insurance agent, and he went out and he started by calling everybody he knew, all his buddies, you know, all his family, and they didn't want to talk about personal things with him. So that's where, like, the personal relationship, you know, like how much money they made and stuff like that, they weren't comfortable. So that's where, even though he knew someone, it was harder to turn a friend into a client. For me, the challenge was articulating what I could do for them in a very specific way that it was easy for them, or more often at that stage in our lives, their bosses, to say yes to. And that kind of gets back to the how do you organize your day question as well. I know if I have a lot of writing projects, I can't kind of dedicate 3 straight days to just doing writing projects, because then that isolation does set in. You know, you need to pepper that with some conference calls, some in-person meetings, so that you're staying fresh and you're staying creative. If I can kind of explain it a little bit more about how it's valuable to a small business owner, A, you're getting an expert in, you know, and you're able to do more and provide more value for your client than one person can do. B, it works well for you in terms of your taxes. because what I pay my subcontractors, I can then write off on my taxes, just like many people who pay me 1099 me, and they can do the same thing. So as you grow, you want to be a little bit more aware of not just the money in, money out, but also the tax obligations that you have as a result, and how to manage them appropriately. And subcontractors fit in that space well. I started with recommendations from peers and from friends. I think maybe it's the English major thing. I have a lot of creative friends. Some people who are doing it on the side, and some people who are doing it exclusively as freelancers, or were in-house with somebody and then had some time. Peers and friends, and then people with whom I worked on other projects. I would love to have a college intern who is reliable and creative and energetic. I think it's a great opportunity. I think it's great for me to learn from you guys, and for you guys to be able to maybe learn some stuff from me. I have not had good luck in the past, unfortunately, but I'm certainly open to it. And I think it would be really, really cool to get an intern who's in a program like this, because you guys get it. Sometimes if you work with somebody maybe who's like just in marketing, they just want to do marketing, which is great. They want to perfect, their area of expertise, but it's really energizing and exciting to work with people who want to build something. And if I can help you guys build that thing that's kind of itching at you that you want to build, that would be an honor for me, truly.